But what happens is that when you become part of an organization, a political organization that is controlled by the billionaires, it's the billionaires' agenda that holds sway, not our agenda. And so there is no avenue for us to win anything substantial for the working class without declaring class war on the ruling class.
This strategy, which has been tried a million times, of trying to reform, trying to find the soul of this soulless party, the Democratic Party, is a complete dead end.
Thank you, Joan and Justin, and good evening, everyone who's here in person and also everybody who's watching over live stream. The congressional campaign is a national campaign, and Workers Strike Back is a nationwide organization. So we have Workers Strike Back members in multiple cities across the nation, not only in Seattle. Talking about the 2025 election, obviously the highlight is the election of Zohran Mamdani as mayor of New York. He ran on extremely popular demands like rent freeze and funding universal childcare and free buses by taxing the rich. This election was a resounding repudiation of Zionism and of Wall Street and of the politicians who represent Zionism and Wall Street. It's also decisive because he is the first New York City mayoral candidate in 55 years to get 1 million votes. The common denominator of all the election results in 2025 is that it is a rebuke. It's a very clear rebuke of Donald Trump and the Republicans, especially along the lines of how Donald Trump promised affordability. He promised that he was going to represent the common man and woman. He did that in his first administration as well, and he has broken his promises both times. And there is massive anger nationally about all of that. There is a huge wave of anger against the tariffs, the cost of living crisis, and also anger at the genocide and anger at his warmongering and saber rattling now against Venezuela and Colombia. And not to mention the growing anger at ICE raids and the masked agents who are going around terrorizing our cities, the cuts to Medicare and Medicaid, the SNAP funding, the food assistance funding that was lost for many days. All of this shows that people are angry and people can be won over to a genuinely progressive fighting agenda. The other elections, though, reveal the real character of the elections that we have had this year. Omar Fateh was a Mamdani-like candidate. He was called the Mamdani of Minneapolis or Mamdani of the Midwest. And he ran for mayor of Minneapolis. He ran against an extremely unpopular corporate mayor who had already been there for 2 terms. His name is Jacob Fry. He was actually the mayor when the George Floyd rebellion happened in 2020. There was huge anger against him about the racism, about police brutality, about the cost of living crisis, and also the fact that the mayoral administration of Jacob Fry dealt with the George Floyd rebellion with extreme cruelty, calling in the National Guard. And you know who else helped him call the National Guard in Minneapolis? It's Democratic Governor Tim Walz, who was Kamala Harris's running mate, if you might remember. But the point here is that Fateh was not able to defeat Jacob Fry despite all that unpopularity of Fry, because he, meaning Fateh, did not bring in any concrete demands in any real way in the way that Mamdani brought his working class demands consistently. Fateh, unfortunately, did not do that, and he lost the election, which is not surprising. That is what we thought would happen. In the Seattle mayoral election, and those of you who are here in person would know about what I'm talking about, but those of you who are on live stream, just to share with you all, progressive Democratic candidate Katie Wilson is winning. I mean, the mail-in ballots are still being counted, but she's ahead now. She's defeating Bruce Harrell, the incumbent mayor, who is a corporate mayor or corporate politician, as corporate as they come. Bruce Harrell was a city council member when I was on the Seattle City Council. And I remember very clearly during the fight for the $15 minimum wage, and when we won it, it became the first major city $15 minimum wage. At that time, it was very clear that from the very beginning, it was only my office that was, as a socialist, independent, revolutionary socialist office, that was fighting for $15 an hour. In fact, among the 8 council members who are all Democrats, not one of them was willing to go out and support $15 an hour. And not only that, there were council members like Bruce Harrell. As I said, they were all Democrats. Bruce Harrell was among the Democrats who fought tooth and nail for every possible corporate loophole in our $15 legislation. And we We should be proud as working people and as socialists. We should be proud. Worker Strike Back's legacy goes back to all of that fight back. And in that fight back, we defeated the Democrats we didn't defeat them on every loophole, but we defeated them on the main ones. One of the main ones they wanted was to eliminate inflation increases in $15 an hour. We defeated them on that. And that is why Seattle's minimum wage, which is $20.76 today, is the highest minimum wage in the nation. And next year, Seattle's minimum wage is going to go up even further to $21.35. But we won that by fighting against Democrats like Bruce Harrell, not by trying to have backroom conversations with him and trying to cajole him and convince him to do the right thing. No, we did that by building the 15 Now mass campaign, which mobilized thousands of working people through my office and through my fellow socialists. We organized neighborhood action groups, protest action conferences, and it was the power of that kind of organized militant working class alongside a socialist city council office that we were able to win. So I say good riddance to Bruce Harrell. Unfortunately, I don't think the politics of people like Katie Wilson is the answer either. Katie Wilson has made it very clear, and you can read it in the Seattle Times. She has made it very clear she does not intend to fight the system in any way. In fact, she has pledged to uphold the system, that I don't want to tear it down, I want to work with it. She ran on no clear demands, and this was one of the reasons why her election was so close with Bruce Harrell, despite having the endorsements of many, many progressive Democratic Party leaders, because she did not excite in working class people the kind of belief that, yes, we could actually fight for these things and we could win them, and that there is something in it for us. So for working people, it is not about electing a person by itself. It's about electing a fighter so that we can build a fight back using that office. Elections in themselves mean very little to us. And I have observed Katie Wilson's role closely when I was on the Seattle City Council. And unfortunately, she has not been willing to fight the progressive establishment. And I don't imagine that's going to change, especially based on how she ran her campaign and what she has said publicly. But overall, these election results show that people, as I said, people are fed up with corporate politics and are angry. The cost of living, the genocide in Gaza being two crucial issues, as I said, especially there is a dramatic shift in the support for Israel. I mean, such a thing has never been observed in US mass consciousness, where the majority, a resounding majority of American working and young people are absolutely opposed to Israel's occupation of Gaza, not just the genocide. And any candidate, any politician taking funding from AIPAC, everybody knows about AIPAC, the Zionist, the notorious Zionist anti-Israel lobby group. AIPAC funding has become a test. So any politician taking money from AIPAC is immediately classified as somebody who has betrayed us, because they have. I mean, taking money from AIPAC automatically means that you're going to stand up for Israel and not for ending the brutal occupation. And so our opponent in the congressional campaign, Democratic Congress member Adam Smith, he has, of course, as many of you know already, but if you don't, you should know, he has funded the Israeli regime to the hilt. He funded the genocide in Gaza. He also voted to ban US funding for United Nations food assistance to Gaza. And at a time when there were multiple reports from very credible organizations coming about the mass starvation that was being orchestrated systematically by the Israeli regime. And so this is the kind of guy. It's no surprise that for Adam Smith, AIPAC was his biggest funder in last year's election. The fact that AIPAC money has become radioactive for any Democratic Party candidate who wants to have progressive credentials is credit to the pro-Palestine anti-war movement. It's credit to the tens of millions of American working and young people who have reached the correct conclusion about the need to end the brutal Israeli occupation of Palestinian lands. But it is not at all any type of guarantee by itself. Far from it. We saw just recently, Massachusetts Democratic Congress member Seth Moulton, he's up for re-election next year, and he's very scared of the anti-war movement. Why? Because he voted to fund the genocide in Gaza, but he recently announced he's not taking money from AIPAC. But what the hell does that mean? You already funded the genocide to the hilt. You have the blood of 500,000 Palestinians on your hands. And now you say you're not taking any money from AIPAC. This is an attempt. You know what this is? This is an attempt to try and whitewash their bloody record. We can't let them whitewash their bloody records. That's right. And there's more to this story as well. Progressive Democrats like Pramila Jayapal, AOC, Jamal Bowman, they have not taken money from AIPAC. There's plenty of Democratic Congress members who've not taken money from AIPAC, but they have also, some of them have voted for genocide, and some of them who didn't vote directly for the genocide, they still voted for the so-called Iron Dome and David Sling and so on and so forth, which are called quote-unquote defensive weaponry, which they are not. The Israeli state is carrying out a brutal occupation and apartheid regime. There is no defensive aspect to this whatsoever. Everything is in order to carry out the offense in the region. And so we don't buy into Iron Dome and other weapons being called defensive. And so, in other words, all these progressives, Pramila Jayapal, AOC, Jamal Bowman, they all have, in some shape or form, supported the genocide. In fact, 53 members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, not the ones I mentioned, but others, 53 members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus voted for the main bill that sent $26 billion for the genocide in Gaza. And that was the same bill, one of the bills that also banned food assistance to Gaza. 38 members of the Congressional Black Caucus voted for it. We have to ask ourselves, what does it mean to say that, on paper, for you to say that you are an elected official who stands against racism, a black elected official who is purportedly standing against racism? How can you say that you're standing against racism and vote for a genocide that kills 500,000 people? The shutdown fiasco is another example that exposes the true nature of the Democratic Party. Democrats are a dumpster fire of a party. Could it be any more obvious? I mean, it should be obvious in general, but could it be any more obvious than with the shutdown that they don't give a damn about working and poor people? They carried out a government shutdown as a purely performative gesture, claiming that they were standing up for Affordable Care Act subsidies and the restoration of Medicaid funding. But they held the shutdown just long enough for the 2025 elections to get over. Then they pick a group of senators who are either retiring or not up for re-election until 2028 to be the so-called bad guys. I mean, seriously, they think the entirety of the American working class is just plain stupid. But we are not, are we? Tens of millions of poor people went through absolute heartache for the basic food assistance they lost during the shutdown. Federal workers went 6 weeks without pay, many of them facing evictions because they were unable to pay their rent. And no, the Democratic Party politicians did not cave in to Trump and the Republicans because they lack a spine. They didn't cave in because they lack a spine. The Democratic Party capitulated on healthcare in this shutdown for the same reasons they never passed Medicare for all or made the ACA credits permanent, because they are a party of the billionaires who hate the idea of a public healthcare system. In fact, who hate the working class having anything good at all.
That's right.
As the great American socialist Eugene Debs said in 1912, the Democratic and Republican parties are not opposed to each other on any question of principle. They both represent the capitalist class. They are merely competing with each other for the spoils of office. The shutdown was cynically motivated by the Democrats to begin with, a ploy to get people to vote blue in the 2025 elections. They never had any intention of actually getting anything for working people out of this. And in fact, there's so much evidence to show that they don't give a damn about working people. In states like Vermont and California, the Democratic Party has taken explicit efforts to crush any of the movements that have been there to win universal health care. The point is that Democrats don't want to make working people's lives better, nor do the Republicans. Obviously, what both these parties want is to do their job in maximizing the profits of the capitalists and keeping working people yo-yoing between them without any real alternative. So we know that it's not just about those 8 senators or however many there were the whole party was involved in this shutdown sellout. And the ones who voted against the sellout, you know what their job is? Their real job is to give cover to the people who voted for the sellout. In other words, the people who take good votes, good votes meaning good for the working class, their job is to give cover to those who take bad votes for the working class. This also exposes the total fallacy of the idea that, you just need to vote for one more Democrat next year. Let's just get one more Democrat. We've heard this, right? We've been hearing this. Let's just get one more, then we'll get the House majority. But how does it help electing one more Democrat, when no matter how many Democrats there are, there's always some Democrats who are going to take the wrong votes. It completely exposes the Democratic Party. And all of this brings us back to the idea that Mamdani, AOC, Sanders, the Democratic Socialists of America leadership, all of them are putting forward, which is that the Democratic Party can be reformed, that we should be fighting for the soul of the Democratic Party, as Mamdani has said. Bernie and AOC are going on this fight oligarchy tour where they're saying that, well, in order to fight Trump, you need to vote blue in the 2026 midterm elections. And they're putting forward this idea that there's the corporate Democratic Party and then there's the People's Democratic Party. And you just need to vote blue for that one more Democrat who can help the People's Democratic Party, have sway over the corporate Democratic Party. What do these People's Democrats do? Let's look at that. Mamdani's election night speech as a People's Democrat was to lower expectations of the working class, who are excited that maybe we will now finally we will win something like freezing rent, free buses, and universal childcare. What did he say in his speech? He said, a great New Yorker once said that while you campaign in poetry, you govern in prose. You know what that means? That's code for let's tone down our expectations. We were activists when we were running the campaign. Now we have to govern. And governing means selling out. When I was first elected in 2013 to the Seattle City Council, many Democratic Party operatives, some of whom have now become well-known politicians, gave me the same advice. Yeah, all that activism, that's great. But now that you're going to City Hall, you need to tone all that down. You need to start governing, get down to the brass tacks. If I had a dime for every time I heard, get down to the brass tacks. And somebody literally told me, you need to learn from the Democratic Party politicians. and of course, I knew that if I learned anything from the Democrats, I would straight up sell out the working class people who had brought me to City Hall. And so I think we have to be very clear about what all of this means. The speech that Mamdani gave on election night did not have a word about movements or next steps. The press conference he did the next morning where he announced his transition team, there was no substance at all about what policies he's going to be bringing up. The highlight of this transition team, all the news channels announced that they were all women. The thing that they didn't tell you is that these are all women who have worked in the administrations of Bill de Blasio, Eric Adams, and Michael Bloomberg. That is why the more fundamental question that is associated with the question of, should we go Democratic Party or should we have a new party for the working class is the question of the strategy needed for the working class to win anything substantial. Can you win anything by avoiding a fight against the capitalist class? And that's where the question of the Democratic Party comes in, because the Democratic Party is controlled by billionaires and multimillionaires. Everybody knows that. Nobody actually denies it. But what they say is that, yes, that may be true, but still we can move our agenda forward because it's too hard to build a new party, and then we can build the People's Democratic Party. But what happens is that when you become part of an organization, a political organization that is controlled by the billionaires, it's the billionaires' agenda that holds sway, not our agenda. And so there is no avenue for us to win anything substantial for the working class without declaring class war on the bourgeois, on the ruling class. And really what it should say is not declare class war, but declare class war back. Because you know what? There is no peace under capitalism for the working class and for the poor, because it is always, the steady state of capitalism is always class war raining down upon us from the billionaires and the multimillionaires like an economic aerial bombardment. And then on top of that, sometimes you have literal aerial bombardment like the people of Gaza are facing. So that's why Our choices are not, can we win something without going to war against the billionaire class? Or can we win something, but we have to go to war against the billionaire class? No, our choices are, can we go to war against the billionaire class and actually change society for the better? Or should we lay down and die? Those are the choices that are posed to us. There is no peace with the billionaire class. And I think that is why we have to be clear that even though there are tens of thousands of people, millions of people who are energized, we need to have the correct strategy. We need to put the correct strategy forward. We cannot have leaders who, for example, like Zoran Mamdani, who, as the New York Times reported, his main focus has been to carry out what they call a charm offensive on the billionaires, like trying to cajole them into believing that he is on their side. No billionaire is stupid. If you say tax the billionaires, they know that it's not in their interest. So rather than having this imaginary notion that somehow you're going to win them over for taxes on the billionaires, we should rally working people who are absolutely not only willing, but itching to fight for a tax on billionaires. That was how we won the Amazon tax in Seattle in 2020, which now raises hundreds of millions of dollars every year for affordable housing for the working class. In fact, as part of the Amazon tax victory, we also won a specific chunk of money to build affordable social housing, publicly owned housing for the Black working class and poor community that has been devastated because of the skyrocketing rents. And one of those projects actually is being built by New Hope Missionary Baptist Church right here, and its chief pastor, Reverend Jeffrey, who was one of the main fighters of the Tax Amazon movement. But we won that by defeating the Democratic Party, which was viciously opposed to the idea of taxing billionaires because they serve the billionaires like Jeff Bezos and Howard Schultz of Starbucks who were completely opposed to it. So we won it by organizing action conferences, protest rallies, and most importantly, by organizing a ballot initiative petition where we said that if the city council didn't pass Amazon tax through a city council vote, we were going to go straight to the voters through a ballot initiative. And it was a credible threat because we collected 30,000 signatures for the tax Amazon ballot measure. And we collected those 30,000 signatures in 3 months, average of 10,000 signatures a month. That was during the George Floyd rebellion because working class people were out there in the protests, not only to fight against racism, but also to fight against economic injustice. And at that time, we were told, not only by the Democrats, but by their proxies, the NGO leaders and the labor leaders, and also, unfortunately, the DSA leaders, they told us, don't bring the Tax Amazon petition because it's not a Black issue. I was told I have no right to bring any demand to the Black, to the Black Lives Matter movement because I'm not Black and Tax Amazon is not a Black issue. We recognized that this was an example of gatekeeping. We refused to accept that. And we went straight to working class people, Black, white, and otherwise. And the petitions were flying out of our hands. People would say, fuck yeah, I want to tax Amazon. I'm going to sign that petition. That is the approach we need. And that approach, unfortunately, tragically for the working class, is completely missing in the labor leadership, in the NGO leadership, in the liberal leadership, and certainly in the Democratic Party, which doesn't even represent us in the first place. So that's why it is extremely important for us to continue building Worker Strike Back. You already heard examples of how Worker Strike Back has been instrumental in winning victories and actually defeating the Democratic Party again and again. And this is the leadership that is not being provided by the labor leadership. So I urge you all, if you haven't joined Worker Strike Back already, those of you who are here and on the live stream, join Worker Strike Back and also get involved in our congressional campaign, because if we can elect the first ever revolutionary socialist to the US Congress, it will be nothing less than a political earthquake. We are fighting for free healthcare for all, for national rent control, and for a national $25 an hour minimum wage. In big cities, we believe it should be at least $30 an hour. We are fighting to end the genocide in Gaza and all US military funding for the Israeli state and end the brutal occupation. We are also fighting to stop all the deportations and shut down ICE and the detention centers. So if that sounds to you like a good plan, then join us. Solidarity.
Millions of working people around this country are absolutely furious. The recent elections are really not a vote for the Democrats. They're a vote against the Republicans. They're a vote against the current status quo. But the problem is that in the context of all this mass anger, most people aren't aware of where it is to go if they want to fight back, how it is that they can effectively fight back. And that's why we launched Workers Strike Back, because it's, in and of itself, the anger is not going to change things. The working class needs to be far better organized than it is. And it needs not just one-off protests, because there have been a lot of those. It needs an organized movement that is prepared to engage in a class struggle against the billionaires, and not just against the billionaires, but against their politicians, and also against those politicians who present themselves as reformers of their party, but reformers of the Democratic Party, who present themselves as reasonable advocates for change. Kshama was right to say that Zoran Mamdani's victory is a blow to Wall Street. It is a blow to the Zionist lobby. That is true. But they're not threatened by Zoran Mamdani in the same way that they're threatened by Kshama Sawant. And the reason for that is because they take comfort in the fact that Zoran Mamdani is saying that he's going to reform the Democratic Party. They take comfort in the fact that he's carrying out this charm offensive against the billionaires, or rather with the billionaires. They take comfort in the fact that he's backed down on a number of his promises. They take comfort in the fact that he has rehired Jessica Tisch as the police commissioner. So all these things, the problem we have with this, and people will ask us, why criticize Mamdani? He hasn't even started yet. Why are you saying these things? Give the guy a chance. The reason that we have to say something is when we see the working class being directed down a dead end, into a dead end alley in the dark, we have to say, that's a fucking mistake. It's a mistake. It's not going to work. We owe it to the working class to say, this is the tactics, this is the strategy that we need to fight back and win. And that this strategy, which has been tried a million times, of trying to reform, trying to find the soul of this soulless party, the Democratic Party, is a complete dead end. And so I think, what people have asked us, what should Mamdani do? And I'm going to say this as though it's possible Mamdani would do it. I don't think that it really is, but let's say it anyway. So if Mamdani wanted to, he has now over 100,000 people who volunteered in his campaign. That's a lot of people. He could take the momentum from that election victory and those 100,000 people, and he could organize one fucking incredible movement for any one of his demands. He could say, we're going to fight first for free transit. We're going to fight first for free childcare. We're going to fight for the $30 minimum wage that I talked about a little bit. We're going to fight for one of these things, and we're going to launch an almighty mass movement. Here's the rally we're going to be holding in January. And at that rally, we're going to begin the process of organizing a mass movement. We're going to launch neighborhood action groups. We're going to launch mass organizing conferences, mass rallies, mass protests. We're going to bring pressure in every possible way on this political establishment until it finally caves in and passes the things that we're demanding. That is exactly what we did in Seattle. That is exactly what Kshama Sawant did when she was elected in 2013. That's exactly what she did. She launched 15 Now. And the 15 Now movement carried out all of these things and more. And it was that movement which found every possible way to put pressure on the Democratic Party politicians, not only to pass 15, but to undermine all their attempts to water down 15, which were not minimal things. As Kshama mentioned, they wanted to get rid of automatic inflation increases. They wanted to limit it to only a section of the working class. They specifically wanted to shut out any worker working for a franchise, which included fast food workers, obviously, the very people who had been leading the fight for the $15 minimum wage. So they wanted to do all these things to gut it. And the only reason that didn't happen is because of the movement that we built. And so the central lesson that we're trying to teach working people is that class struggle is what is necessary to win anything. We didn't invent these ideas. These are the basic ideas of revolutionary socialism. They are the basic ideas of revolutionary socialism. And we don't just need to learn them in an academic sense. We need to learn to apply them. We need not just hundreds, but thousands and hundreds of thousands of people to learn to apply them. And that is how change can actually happen. And that's why not only do we need to build Workers' Strike Back, but winning this election campaign could have an absolutely transformative effect on national politics, the way that the $15 minimum wage did when we won it here in Seattle. And not everybody is aware of this, but it was the first $15 minimum wage that was won in a big city in the United States. And it was that victory that spread around the country. And literally that victory that we won here is the reason that tens of millions of workers got a raise. And we did that with a few hundred people fighting back. Can you imagine what we could do with 100,000 people? And that's our critique of Zoran Mamdani. And we would love to see him change his mind. But more importantly, we'd like to see the people who helped him get elected change their mind that they should go to this guy to find out what to do. Instead, they need to organize, they need to build on that momentum, and they need to fight and win these things that they just campaigned for.
Yeah, just in terms of this year's election, the general election results, I think what we saw is the result of a massive overreach by the Trump administration on many issues. These votes, I think, we are clear, don't represent votes for the Democratic Party, which has its lowest approval levels in 35 years. These were overwhelmingly votes against Trump and his policies, which are also deeply unpopular. As one example of this, there was talk that Donald Trump had made big inroads in the state of New Jersey, but what we saw was a landslide victory for the Democratic Party candidate for governor, Mikey Sherrill. She got the most votes of any New Jersey governor candidate ever. Also, there's been a trend in the state that no single party had held the governor's office for more than 2 full consecutive terms for over 60 years. Mikey Sherrill is succeeding a 2-term Democratic governor, breaking that trend. In addition, we saw Democrat Abigail Spanberger won the governor's race in Virginia. And in California, voters passed an initiative to basically gerrymander the state's congressional districts to shift 5 districts to Democrats from Republicans. So, I think it's clear from these results that working people hate the Trump administration's policies so far. Trump's tariffs are raising the cost of living. Just like Biden, he continued to allow the genocide in Gaza to get worse, including helping to engineer the mass starvation campaign against Palestinians earlier this year. Trump has carried out a horrific immigration policy, including ICE detention as a political weapon, kidnapping working people off the streets in broad daylight. Trump and the Republicans passed trillions of dollars of cuts to Medicaid and Medicare with no fight back from the Democrats. And Trump has fired tens of thousands of federal workers with no fight back from the union leadership. Interestingly, Marjorie Taylor Greene is starting to distance herself from Trump and the Republicans. So she recently tweeted, quote, "I come from a working class family. We ran a construction company for over 20 years. That was a little bit funny. I think we have a different definition of working class, but anyway, continuing the quote, she says, "And I've seen firsthand how government failure crushes hardworking Americans. Both parties are to blame. Republicans and Democrats have let the American people down for decades. While Americans clock in every single day, Congress isn't even working." So that's from Marjorie Taylor Greene. Large majorities of Americans do not support the policies of the Trump administration, and the recent election is more concrete evidence that things are not looking good for Trump. However, we know where this is going. Obama was elected on a promise of hope and change, and then he bailed out the banks in the 2008 financial crisis. He continued all the wars abroad, and he didn't fight for universal health care. Anger at Obama and the bailout of the big banks helped lead to the rise of the Tea Party, which created an opening for the right wing, which, led to Trump's election. He became extremely unpopular, especially for how he oversaw the COVID chaos that threw working people's lives into turmoil. Because of that, Biden was elected. And he didn't deliver for working people, so Trump was elected yet again, right? So, the Democratic Party will continue to, unfortunately, get elected despite never fighting for working people, because we still do not have an independent working class leaders in most areas, much less a new party for working people that we need. So while things can change at this point, it does seem more likely that the Democrats will make more gains in the 2026 midterms as people reject Trump's attacks here and around the world. But I think the California initiative to change the congressional districts to favor Democratic Party candidates is itself a perfect example of how bankrupt the Democratic Party is. Rather than fighting Trump by fighting for working people, the Democrats pursued this electoral gerrymandering maneuver to just increase their own election chances. If they fought for healthcare and housing funded by taxing the rich, that would be extremely popular and would expose Trump. But the Democrats don't do this because this is a party of and for the billionaires. I think what we saw with Mamdani is an exception in terms of the working class demands he ran on, but he's still not leading with a strategy that can win those demands. So that's why I think, Kshama Sawant's independent socialist campaign for Congress is so important. This campaign can be a historic breakthrough for breaking out of this vicious cycle of the two parties and lay the basis for a new fighting working class party.